John. That should fail. The page should not come back with John, it should come back with Yoda. So I'll refresh the page. And indeed, it is now a failure. It should have been Yoda, not John. So if I wanted to pre-populate the database after setting up the database, I could just create some person objects and call save on them. I could have created John Doe and Mary Smith and a whole bunch of people populated the database perhaps in a separate setup method. But this was an empty database. It was easier for me to check, and so the list should only have one name in it. If I were to have another test, it would also begin with an empty database. There's nothing persistent. So whatever I want set up, if I want it to be regular between all my test cases, I should have a separate setup method and do the setup in there. That setup will be called before every test. So there's no inspection of the graphic user interface. We're not seeing if widgets get rendered. We're purely looking at inputs and outputs, which is appropriate. You really don't test the actual visible user interface without having JavaScript involved. We're just on the server side. We're not testing client behavior. So we're really only interested in input and output. I hope that helps as you start rewriting your acceptance tests. They should really get easier. Instead of having to look at a whole string of a response as you did with the command line application, you can inspect individual pieces of the context of the page you render. And if some of those context elements, as they are in my case, are lists, you could iterate through them. So I could write a loop and make an assertion on what I expect to be in position 0, 1, 2, 3, if there's some automated way of doing that. For a realistic test, I don't think you would want automated data like that. You would have specific data loaded into the database, and you would expect that specific data to show up. So this code and the video, I'm gonna, if you're watching it, it's in Canvas, and the code is in a link right below the video, so you can play around with it. I should point out that this project in particular, for the add person page, this project uses Django forms. This is a method of defining the fields that should go into a form separately, and then letting Django render the form itself. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to cover it. This is something that I cover in server-side internet programming, CompSci 481. But if you're interested, it's not that hard to pick up by reading the Django documentation. And after I define a form, in this case a model form based on a particular model, specify which fields I want to have gathered, Django generates the HTML code. So the HTML from here to here through the submit button was all generated by Django. I just said, hey, here's a form object to the template as part of the context. And Django rendered all the labels and the input elements and the submit all on its own. All right, here's the video I promised. If you have any questions over the weekend, shoot me an email and I'd be happy to make more videos.